The silence in our house wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating sort that precedes a violent storm. I was sitting at the kitchen table in our small home in Columbus, Ohio, the same oak table I'd refinished by hand 3 summers ago. I was staring at a stack of unpaid medical bills and a lukewarm cup of black coffee that tasted like battery acid. My hands still smelled like the industrial grease from the HVAC warehouse, where I'd just finished a 12-hour shift. Sarah walked in, but she didn't go for the kettle. She didn't even look at me. She stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the gray, overcast Ohio morning. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than my monthly truck payment, a gift from her wealthy Aunt Margaret before the old woman passed away 3 months ago. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was different, brittle, like glass about to shatter under extreme pressure. "I need you to listen, and I need you to not interrupt. I've spent the last few weeks thinking, and I've realized that our lives are moving in two completely different directions." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. For 10 years, I had worked 2 jobs, hauling heavy units by day and pulling security shifts at a local mall by night, to keep us afloat while she pursued her dreams of being an artistic consultant. I didn't mind the sweat. I loved her. But the woman standing there looked like a stranger wearing my wife's skin. "I got the call from the executors this morning," she continued, finally turning around. There was a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in years, a predatory glint that made my stomach churn. "My great Aunt Margaret's estate, which it's finally settled. It's not just a few thousand, Ethan. It's $12 million. Cash, property, and offshore holdings in the Caymans." I started to smile, a massive wave of relief washing over me. We were saved. No more double shifts. No more deciding which bill to pay late. "Sarah, that's a miracle. We can finally start that business you wanted and maybe finally move closer to the park." "There is no we, Ethan." She snapped the words out like a whip, cutting me off mid-sentence. "I've already had my attorney draw up the papers. I want you to pack your things and get out. Now, this house is in my name, and frankly, you don't fit into the life I'm about to lead. You're a worker bee, Ethan. I'm a queen now." Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like. Muina, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Welcome to Family Secrets and Revenge, where the truth always costs more than you think. The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. I looked at the woman I'd supported through her darkest depressions, the woman whose hand I'd held through 3 failed IVF rounds that drained our savings, and I saw nothing but cold, calculated ice. It was as if the money had acted like a solvent, dissolving every ounce of humanity she had left. "You're serious?" I whispered, my voice cracking. 10 years, Sarah. I worked until my knuckles bled to make sure you never had to worry about a roof over your head. I didn't care about the money. I cared about us." "And you got 10 years of my company," she retorted, crossing her arms over her chest. "Anna, consider it a fair trade. But let's be real. You're a blue-collar guy with grease under his fingernails and a wardrobe that consists of flannel and work boots. I'm a multi-millionaire. We aren't in the same social stratosphere anymore. My bags are already packed for a trip to NYC to meet my new wealth management team. I want you gone by the time I get back tonight. I've already changed the codes on the smart locks." She tossed a thick manila legal folder on the table. It slid across the wood and tapped against my coffee cup. It was a formal eviction notice and a preliminary divorce filing citing irreconcilable differences. She had been planning this the moment she knew the money was coming. She hadn't even given me a chance to celebrate her good fortune. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just stood up, went to the garage, Sarnin, and grabbed my old battered duffel bags. As I packed my few changes of clothes, I realized something. Sarah knew about the money, but she didn't know the history of how Margaret got it. I did, because I was the one who had spent my weekends driving to Margaret's dusty old estate in Shaker Heights to help the old lady organize her archives, while Sarah was out networking at high-end bars she couldn't afford. I moved into a dingy one-room studio apartment in a rougher part of downtown Cincinnati, about 2 hours away from the life I knew. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' late-night reality TV shows, and the air smelled like a mix of stale cigarettes and cheap floor cleaner. For the first 2 weeks, I functioned like a ghost. I went to the warehouse, moved crates until my back screamed, near and came home to stare at the water stains on the ceiling. Sarah, meanwhile, was a ghost of a different kind, a digital one that haunted my every scroll. She was all over social media. She had hired a publicist and was posting photos from rooftop bars in Manhattan, draped in designer labels I couldn't even pronounce. She was always surrounded by a new circle of friends, beautiful, hollow people who looked like they'd been generated by an algorithm. She looked liberated. She looked like she had finally shed the burden of a husband who worked for a living. But as I sat in my dark apartment, I kept thinking about Margaret. Aunt Margaret was a woman of secrets. She had been a silent partner in several shipping firms back in the late 80s and 90s, firms that operated out of the Great Lakes and hadn't always played by the maritime rules. And I remembered a specific conversation we had in her library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and peppermint. "Ethan," she had told me, her voice a papery rasp as she gripped her cane, "money is a hungry beast. If you don't feed it the truth, it eats the person holding it. Remember that. Some fortunes are just debts disguised as gifts." I realized then that Sarah hadn't just inherited millions. She had inherited a history that she was too arrogant to investigate. 3 weeks into my new lonely life, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Washington, D.C. area code. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Ethan Miller?" the voice asked. It was a man, sounding professional and weary, like someone who spent too much time in windowless offices. "Speaking. Who is this?" "My name is Agent David Vance. No relation to your late aunt. Though the coincidence isn't lost on me. I'm with the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. We've been trying to track down the current beneficiary of the Margaret Vance estate. We went to the Columbus address, but the house is vacant and listed for sale." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't live there anymore, Agent. My wife, or ex-wife, inherited that money and made it clear I wasn't part of the picture. Why are you looking for her?" "Mr. Miller, there's a significant discrepancy regarding the source of the Vance holdings," he said, the sound of papers rustling in the background. "We've flagged several offshore transfers that date back to 1994. It appears the estate isn't just a collection of stocks and bonds. It's the result of a massive insurance fraud scheme involving defunct shipping lines in Lake Erie. If your wife is spending that money, she's essentially spending evidence." I leaned against my cracked kitchen counter. "What does that mean for her?" "It means that if she can't prove the legitimacy of the funds, the government will seize every cent and she could face charges for money laundering. We're looking for the original ledgers, Margaret's private records. We believe they exist, but they weren't in her safe deposit boxes." Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Do you think Sarah deserves to lose everything for the way she treated Ethan? Or should Ethan stay out of it and let her figure it out? Share your thoughts in the comments. While I was speaking to federal agents, Sarah was living a fever dream. She had officially moved into a penthouse in Chicago, one on a glass-walled palace overlooking Lake Michigan. She had a driver, a personal chef who specialized in molecular gastronomy, and a new man on her arm named Julian, a self-proclaimed tech entrepreneur who really just looked like a professional leech with the veneers and a spray tan. She felt invincible. She had blocked my number, blocked my family, and even sent a cease and desist letter to my sister for trying to ask for help with our nephew's urgent surgery costs. Sarah believed that wealth had erased her past, her obligations, and her conscience. One evening at a high society gala for a local museum, Sarah was approached by a woman she didn't recognize. A woman with sharp, bird-like features in a suit that cost more than my first car. "Ms. Miller," the woman said, holding a glass of mineral water. "I'm an auditor with the Vance Estate's primary holding bank. We've noticed you've withdrawn nearly $1.5 million in the last 30 days for personal acquisitions. I'm here to inform you that your accounts are being placed under a temporary administrative hold." Sarah laughed, a loud, sharp sound that drew eyes from the surrounding guests. "Do you know who I am? I am the sole heir. That money is mine. Talk to my lawyers and get out of my sight before I have you fired." But the auditor didn't blink. "I don't work for you, Miss Miller. I work for the bank's compliance department, And currently, the bank is complying with a federal freeze order. Sarah's face went pale under her expensive foundation. She tried to find Julian, but he was already across the room, flirting with a younger woman whose father owned a professional baseball team. The cracks were starting to show. I knew exactly where those ledgers were. Margaret had hinted at it a dozen times during those long afternoons in Shaker Heights. "The foundation of this house is built on paper, Ethan," she'd say, pointing her cane at the ceiling. I used to think she was being metaphorical. I was wrong. I drove my old truck back to the Shaker Heights property. Sarah had put it on the market for $3 million, but the gates were chained and the lawn was starting to grow wild. I didn't have a key anymore, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I broke into my own family's history. I smashed a small window in the cellar and crawled through. The house felt cold and hollow, like a rib cage picked clean. I climbed the stairs to the third-floor attic, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust motes. I went to the far corner, under the eaves where the roof met the floor at a sharp angle. I pulled back a heavy, moth-eaten rug and looked at the floorboards. I saw the faint scratches, marks I'd made years ago when I was moving a heavy wardrobe for Margaret. I used a crowbar I'd brought from the truck to pry up the wood. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture, were 3 leather-bound ledgers. I opened the first one. It wasn't just numbers. It was a roadmap of a crime. Names of port officials, dates of accidental sinkings, and records of millions of dollars diverted from a pension fund meant for the dock workers of the Great Lakes. Margaret hadn't been a savvy investor. She had been a thief. And the money Sarah was using to buy diamonds and champagne belonged to thousands of retired men who were currently struggling to pay for their heating bills in the Ohio winter. I sat on the dusty floor of that attic for what felt like hours, the ledgers heavy in my lap. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the way she looked at me that morning, the sheer disgust she felt for my blue-collar life. Part of me wanted to take these books to the backyard and burn them. If I did that, the feds might never find the proof they needed. Sarah could keep her millions, and I could move on with my life, knowing I'd protected her one last time. But then I thought about the names in the ledger. Men like Arthur Kowalski, sucker who worked 40 years on the docks and died in a state-run nursing home because his pension had vanished. I thought about the families who were robbed so Margaret could live in a mansion and Sarah could live in a penthouse. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Ethan is holding the one thing that could ruin Sarah or save thousands of innocent people who were robbed years ago. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. If I stayed quiet, I was just as guilty as Margaret. I tucked the ledgers under my arm and walked out of the house. I didn't go back to my studio apartment. I drove straight to the federal building in downtown Cleveland. The federal agents were waiting for me. I spent 6 hours in a sterile room, going through the ledgers with 3 different investigators. They were stunned. The detail Margaret had kept was meticulous. She had kept the records not out of guilt, but out of a need to keep track of who she owned. "Mr. Miller," Agent Vance said, closing the final book, "this is it. This is the smoking gun. This money was never legally Margaret's to leave to anyone. By law, the entire estate is now subject to immediate forfeiture to compensate the victims of the pension fraud." "What happens to Sarah?" I asked. "Since she's already spent a significant portion of the funds, she's in a very precarious legal position," he explained. "We'll be issuing a seizure warrant for all assets purchased with Vance estate money. That includes her new property, her vehicles, and her jewelry. Because she was warned of the audit and continued to spend, she may also face criminal charges for obstruction." As I walked out of the federal building, I felt a strange sense of peace. I hadn't done this for revenge. I'd done it for Arthur Kowalski and the others. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small part of me that felt the poetic justice of it all. 2 days later, my phone exploded. 42 missed calls, 100 text messages, all from Sarah. I finally answered the 43rd call. "Ethan! Ethan, you have to help me!" she screamed. I could hear wind in the background. She was outside and she sounded hysterical. "They came to the penthouse, Ethan. Men in jackets. They took everything. They took my bags, my watch. They even took the furniture. They said the money isn't real. They said it's stolen." It was stolen. "Yeah, Sarah," I said, my voice flat. It was stolen from the dock workers' pension fund 30 years ago. I found the ledgers. The line went silent for a long beat. You? You found them? And you gave them to the police? Ethan, how could you? I'm your wife. You're the woman who kicked me out of our home because I had grease on my hands, I reminded her. You're the woman who told me I didn't fit into your life. You wanted a life built on that money, Sarah. Well, this is what that life looks like. It's built on a foundation of air. I have nothing, she wailed. Julian left me. He took the last of the cash I had in my purse and just disappeared. I'm at a bus station in Chicago, Ethan. I don't even have enough for a ticket back to Ohio. Please, please send me money. I spent my last bit of savings on the gas to drive those ledgers to the feds and on the deposit for my apartment, I said. I can't help you, Sarah. Maybe you can sell one of those artistic consultant ideas you had. I hung up. The winter in the Midwest is unforgiving, and for Sarah, it was a season of total reckoning. Because she had signed numerous contracts and leases based on wealth she didn't actually own, she was hit with a barrage of civil lawsuits. Landlords, designers, and travel agencies were all lining up to sue her for fraud. She ended up in a women's shelter in South Chicago for a month before her parents, who were embarrassed by the scandal, reluctantly sent her a bus ticket to move back into her childhood bedroom in Arizona. She went from being the queen of Chicago to a 35-year-old woman living in a room with floral wallpaper and high school trophies. I stayed in Cincinnati. I kept my head down. But word got out about what I'd done. Not the part about Sarah, but the part about the ledgers. One afternoon, a man came by the warehouse. He was old with hands that looked like gnarled tree roots and a cap that said United Brotherhood of Longshoremen. You Miller? He asked. I am. I'm Joe. My father was one of the guys Margaret Vance robbed. I just wanted to shake your hand. Most people would have taken the money and run. You did the right thing, kid. The union doesn't forget a favor like that. 2 months later, Joe came back. This time he wasn't alone. Or he was with a representative from a major logistics firm that handled the shipping for the entire Ohio River Valley. Ethan, we've seen your work ethic, the representative said, and we know your history. We need a logistics coordinator, someone who knows the machines, knows the people, and most importantly, someone we can trust with the books. It's a salary position, 6 figures, full benefits, and a corner office that doesn't smell like diesel. I took the job. It wasn't $12 million, but it was mine. I bought a small, modest house in a quiet neighborhood. I bought a new truck. I even started a small garden in the backyard. For the first time in my life, I wasn't working to support someone else's ego. I was working for myself. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had tried to sue me for intentional interference with an inheritance. But no lawyer would take the case. You can't sue someone for reporting a crime, especially when that inheritance was the proceeds of a federal felony. 6 months into my new job, I received a letter. It was postmarked from Sedona, Arizona. Ethan, it began. The handwriting was shaky, stripped of the elegant flourishes she used to pride herself on. I'm working at a diner now. I spend 10 hours a day on my feet, serving coffee to tourists who don't know my name. My back hurts every night. My hands are starting to look like yours used to, dry, cracked, and dirty. I think about what I said to you every single day. I thought the money made me better than you. I realize now it just made me blind. I'm not asking for money anymore. I'm just asking if you can ever forgive me. I read the letter twice. I thought about the Ethan who would have dropped everything to drive to Arizona and save her. That Ethan was gone. He died the moment she tossed that manila folder on the oak table. I didn't write back. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some bridges are meant to stay burned. The federal government eventually finished the liquidation of the Vance estate. It was a massive undertaking that took over a year. They sold the Shaker Heights mansion, the offshore accounts were seized, and even the jewelry Sarah had tried to hide in a friend's safe deposit box was recovered. The total amount recovered was nearly $9 million. After the government took its cut for taxes and legal fees, however, the rest was distributed to the surviving members of the pension fund and their heirs. I received a small check in the mail, a finder's fee or a whistleblower reward, as per the IRS statutes. It was $50,000. I didn't buy a penthouse. I didn't buy a designer suit. I put it into a college fund for my nephew, the one Sarah had refused to help. The circle was finally closing. The revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet and final. A year and a half after the divorce, I was at a logistics conference in Phoenix. It was a purely professional trip, but I found myself with a free evening. Against my better judgment, I looked up the diner where Sarah worked. It was a small, dusty place on the edge of town, the kind of spot where people only stop when they're lost. I sat in my rental car across the street and watched through the window. I saw her. She was carrying a tray of burgers to a booth. She looked older, much older than 36. The spark of arrogance was gone, replaced by a dull, rhythmic exhaustion. A customer said something to her, probably a complaint about the food, and she just bowed her head, apologized, and walked back to the kitchen. There was no fire left in her. The $12 million had been a wildfire that burned through her life and left nothing but ash. I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't need to speak to her. Seeing her work a blue-collar job, the very thing she had despised, was the only closure I needed. My life in Ohio continued to flourish. I met a woman named Claire, a teacher who liked to hike and didn't care about the brand of my shoes. We didn't talk about wealth management or social stratospheres. We talked about books, and the garden, and what we wanted to cook for dinner. One Saturday, while we were cleaning out the garage, Claire found my old HVAC work shirt, the one with the grease stains that Sarah hated so much. "You want to keep this?" Claire asked, holding it up. "Yeah," I said, taking it from her. "Keep it. It reminds me of where I came from, and it reminds me that the only thing that matters is what you do when no one is looking." I realized then that Sarah's regret wasn't about losing me. It was about losing the person she thought she was when she had the money. She didn't miss Ethan. She missed the power. And power built on theft is just a temporary loan from the universe. The Vance estate was officially closed in the spring of 2027. Under the final report was a 500-page document detailing decades of corruption. It became a textbook case for the IRS on how to track legacy fraud. Sarah's name was mentioned in the footnotes as an unwitting but complicit beneficiary. She didn't go to jail, but she was barred from ever serving on a corporate board or holding a financial license. Her reputation was a charred ruin. I sometimes wonder if she still looks at the moon over the Arizona desert and thinks about that penthouse in Chicago. I wonder if she realizes that she could have had it all, the love, the respect, and a comfortable life, if she had just been honest. But greed is a parasite. Once it settles in, it doesn't leave until the host is empty. People often ask me if I regret ruining my wife's life. I tell them the same thing every time. I didn't ruin her life, and I just stopped participating in the lie she was telling. Family secrets are like poison in the blood. They might stay dormant for years, but eventually they will make you sick. The revenge in this story wasn't mine. It belonged to the people who had been waiting 30 years for justice. I was just the one who opened the door. I'm Ethan Miller. I'm a logistics coordinator, a husband-to-be, and a man who can look at himself in the mirror every morning without flinching. Sarah is just a memory now, a cautionary tale about what happens when you value a bank balance over a human soul. In the end, Sarah's story wasn't just about a lost fortune. It was a lesson in the fragility of the ego. She had the world in her hands and threw away the only person who actually loved her for who she was, not what she had. She inherited millions, but she ended up poorer than the day she was born. As for me, I still have grease under my fingernails sometimes when I'm working on my truck. But my heart is light. I know that the best things in life aren't inherited, they're earned. And they can never be seized by a court of law or a federal agent. If you were in Ethan's shoes facing a situation like this, what would you do? Would you have turned in the ledgers or kept the secret to help the woman you once loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us for this journey on family secrets and revenge. This story reminds us that while money can buy a new life, it can't buy a new soul. If you enjoyed this cinematic retelling, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. We read every single comment, and your support helps us bring more of these incredible stories to life. See you in the next one.